with what has been such another wild news day with so much going on. Consider the noticeably subdued, at times even beleaguered President Trump holding this first press conference since Nancy Pelosi came out for impeachment and since the House has gotten so much closer to backing an impeachment probe. 216 Democrats as our count right now. And Donald Trump's almost surreal meeting, yes, of all days, today in the United States with the president of Ukraine. You're looking at the man that we now know, Donald Trump, secretly pressured on a phone call to do something that attorneys general have resigned over, that is the kind of thing that's not allowed in the United States, to investigate a political rival, Joe Biden. And that is what the notes from the call reveal. Throughout tonight's broadcast, I am going to stay on the facts and the law, but when I say certain things that sound like they're a criticism of the president, I will remind you, we are reporting the news of the facts that have emerged about the president. So when I say he's doing something that would be illegal for most people to do inside the United States, it sounds bad. It's actually just what is in these notes. Highly incriminating. They reveal a president asking for what he calls a, quote, favor, an investigation into Joe Biden, who at the time of this call in July was someone that looked like they might be the opponent to Donald Trump in the general election. At least he may have thought so. And that the president was willing to strike a deal to get it. It shows immediately after the Ukrainian president discussed this defense money that was so vital, Donald Trump says he would like you to do us a favor, and then asks about what appears to be a reference to Clinton's emails. That alone would just sound strange. But then the Ukrainian president goes on, this is from the brand new notes we have, to say something very specific. He spoke with Rudy Giuliani recently and plans to meet with him again. Donald Trump then brings up Biden, saying it would be great if the Ukrainians would work with Attorney General Bill Barr to investigate Biden. The president responds that he has a new prosecutor in Ukraine, and that will be 100% his person who will look into the situation. You're seeing the deal being formed. And then Donald Trump says he'll have Rudy Giuliani and Attorney General Bill Barr follow up on all of this. It's all here in black and white. This is what has come out just today. The president demanding a foreign prosecutor investigate his domestic political rival. This is one of the gravest examples of an abuse of government power. And it doesn't matter if that prosecutor that is being pressured to do a political probe to take out a rival or Joe Biden, it doesn't matter whether they're here in the U.S. or overseas.
What those notes reflect is a classic mafia-like shakedown of a foreign leader. This is how a mafia boss talks. What have you done for us? We've done so much for you, but there's not much reciprocity. I have a favor I want to ask you. And what is that favor? Of course, the favor is to investigate his political rival, to investigate the Bidens.
Chairman Schiff, not mincing words there in his response, he also said these notes were even worse and more shocking than he might have expected. Now, this conduct is bad, what's detailed here, to put it plainly. And this is, of course, and this is important before I bring in our experts that you know this tonight, everything I've just told you is just what is public tonight. It's what the White House has been forced and compelled, including with bipartisan pressure in the Senate, to reveal. What is not in public tonight, but what we are already getting vibes and energy and mood about, is the entire all of this. And I can tell you, in just the last few hours, that was privately, that is to say, under the classified rules, turned over to the intelligence committees in Congress. Now, they are dealing with the complaint in private, so I don't have those details for you. But the Democrats who have reviewed it are already saying it's troubling.
I had the opportunity, as have members of the committee, to read the whistleblower complaint. I found the allegations deeply disturbing. I also found them very credible. I can understand why the Inspector General found them credible, even without the benefit yet of the Inspector General's full analysis.
That's a reference to the Trump-appointed official in the intelligence community, this Inspector General, who under the law deemed this urgent and credible, that got us to this point. Adam Schiff basically saying that while he's not yet able to reveal the details of what's in this complaint, we have some of the mood music from the White House notes, and he's waiting to get more from the people blowing the whistle inside the Trump administration. Now, those members of Congress got this whistleblower complaint right around the same time that Donald Trump stepped out there and tried to keep all eyes on him. at this press conference. And we cover a lot of these. I'm only going to show you parts of it that we deem newsworthy or that are relevant to fact-checking. But it was not a typical Trump press conference. He seemed at times meandering, as I mentioned earlier, a little beleaguered. But he did, in his own way, defend everything about what even some Republicans are saying is incriminating in the notes of this call.
Which was a very innocent call. Very, very innocent, very nice call. In fact, Lindsey Graham said to me when he read it, it was very interesting. He's a good man. He's a smart man. He said, I can't believe it. I never knew you could be this really nice to a person. I didn't think you had that in you to be so nice. I was nice. I'm nice to a lot of people. People don't understand that. But I was.
I'm joined tonight for our special coverage by Maya Wiley, a former civil prosecutor from the Southern District of New York and a former counsel to the mayor of New York, Nick Akerman, who was a Watergate special prosecutor, and Eleanor Clift, reporting for us from Washington, where she's a correspondent for the Daily Beast. Good evening to everyone. Maya, what is the significance of the White House notes that have now come to the public eye?
These call notes, I think, as you already stated, Ari, make it very clear that Donald Trump spent most of a call, almost all of the notes, focused specifically on asking the Ukrainian president to reopen an investigation on Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, and to essentially do it as he is dangling. We've been good to you, as President Zelensky says, oh, yes, and I need to come to you to buy more defense weapons. And that's when he says, we've been good to you. You haven't been so good to us. So when you put all that together, and when almost everything that Donald Trump wants to focus on is what they can do, what Ukraine can do for him, and then says he's going to send his personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and his attorney general, it's pretty staggering. It's kind of like the mob boss who says, I've been good to you, right?
Right.
I've been real good to you.
Look,
You haven't been so good to me.
I used to prosecute mob bosses. If you gave this to me, I'd say it's a typical transcript of what I get that I would have put into evidence in the course of a mob boss trial. I mean, it is right out of Don Corleone. He goes through this and talks about how the Europeans have not been good to him. And then he goes on to say, but the United States has been very good to Ukraine. I wouldn't say that. It's reciprocal necessarily because things are happening that are not good. But the United States has been very, very good to Ukraine.
Right, and that he wants what he calls the favor.
Exactly.
And the favor is doing something, just so we stay on this for everyone watching, because there's been so many things happening. The favor is something that if you were ordered to do it, it would be an unlawful order in the United States. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you had a boss when you were at DOJ and they said, I want an investigation of my political rival, go do it. That's an unlawful order.
Totally unlawful.
So what happens when Donald Trump makes that order and tries to execute it through AG Barr, he claims in here, mentioned 5 times, abroad?
Well, it's still a crime. I mean, the crime is committed here in the United States. It doesn't make it any less a crime. And in fact, this impeachment inquiry shouldn't be just looking at President Trump. It should also be looking at AG Barr.
Do you think people who, and we're not there yet because we're investigating, if U.S. officials tried to carry this out, do they have criminal liability?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maya?
I think they would have to be worried, and all we have to do is remember when William Barr testified in his confirmation hearing, and Senator Kamala Harris said, were you ever directed to open an investigation by the president, right, in your conversations about getting this job? And he becomes bizarrely unable to understand the word suggest. Right? He paused and says, I'm having trouble answering the question because I don't know what you mean by suggest. And we all sat there and go, I think it's a pretty simple word. And she couldn't get him to answer the question. This seems to suggest that we know why.
That's a great point, and something that was pressed on him under oath by Kamala, a prosecutor like yourself. I want to put this in the context of what Donald Trump said he would do. In other words, a lot of the best evidence are things that he said in public, and some people didn't take him seriously, and now things that have come out that he said in private. People say, oh, some of his allies tonight are making the argument, well, it's out there, so How bad can it be? Well, no, you fought tooth and nail to keep it from coming out. You kept this part a secret because it executed on the things they used to claim were jokes or hyperbole or political rhetoric. And that context is, let's look at Donald Trump back when the American public was assessing him. This is October 2016. And he said, this is his playbook. If I win, I'll get a political investigation of my political opponent, something that, is, as Nick said, he believes would basically be illegal to carry out. Take a look.
My Attorney General, I will ask to appoint a special prosecutor. We have to investigate Hillary Clinton, and we have to investigate the investigation.
When you look at this as a prosecutor, Nick, and as the Congress is barreling close to impeachment, and there's a political, congressional part of that, and there's a constitutional legal part of that, does that go against Trump, that he has basically long sought these kind of potentially illegal probes?
No, all of these public statements he has made go against him. I mean, in fact, even his statements with respect to this whole conversation. I mean, first he said, oh, there was just the reason the monies didn't go to the Ukraine was because there was an intra-agency dispute. Then he said, oh, it was all about corruption. I mean, just his false exculpatory statements that he's given almost make the case. I mean, if you even take this conversation right from the beginning, I mean, this was a setup call. He did it just in order to get this request to the Ukraine president. He called up congratulating him on his election. He had done that 3 months before in April. The president of Ukraine had to point that out to him, that he only won a parliamentary election, not his presidential election. I mean, Trump had no clue about what election
this was on his mind, and it was coming right after the Mueller testimony.
Right.
Maya, you mentioned that exchange with AG Barr, who was mentioned 5 times in this, and that's another piece of news we're going to get to a little later in the show, which is how DOJ is handling this. Here was that important exchange you referenced.
Has the president or anyone at the White House ever asked or suggested that you open an investigation of anyone? Yes or no, please, sir?
The president or anybody else?
Seems you would remember something like that and be able to tell us.
Yeah, but I'm trying to grapple with the word suggest. I mean, there have been discussions of matters out there that they have not asked me to open an investigation, but
Perhaps they've suggested?
I don't know. I wouldn't say suggest.
Hinted?
I don't know.
Inferred? You don't know? Okay.
So her question was very clear. It was unambiguous. He understood the question. He didn't want to answer it. And I think what he's accurate about, if this is what he was referring to, if Donald Trump actually made the ask, what he could say is, well, yeah, he didn't ask me to open an investigation. He asked me to go talk to a foreign government about what it could do for us. And, you know, the other thing I want to add is Rudy Giuliani last night on Fox.
Well, let me go to Barr before you go to Rudy, and I'll get you back into Rudy. But just to finish the point, because I want viewers to understand what we've got here. To your point on AG Barr, I'm reading now more from these notes. This is the kind of thing that you would reveal in the show moment of a trial of someone. I mean, that's how damning some of these notes are. Congress will decide what to do. If anything, I'm just here to tell you my honest view of having analyzed it. This is bad. The president, quote, I will have Mr. Giuliani give you a call, and I'm also going to have Attorney General Barr call, and we will get to the bottom of it. And we know from the Mueller report that when Donald Trump has these kind of plots, he follows up on them. DOJ tonight saying, no, Barr never talked about it. Is there liability for the Justice Department, and should Attorney General Barr, before we get to Rudy, who's out of government, should Attorney General Barr recuse from any related matters here?
Well, I think Attorney General Barr should absolutely recuse. We know that recusal has come up in the past around Attorney General Barr, and he has not. He will probably seek an ethics decision from the Department of Justice Office of Ethics, and we'll see what happens there. But just for appearance of fairness and justice, he should recuse himself. But the other thing I will add is, putting aside, we need a lot more facts to determine whether he has any liability. Mm-hmm. But what we're talking about with impeachment doesn't require a crime.
No.
So to the extent that there's a defense,
great point.
I didn't actually President Zelensky said, I didn't feel threatened. That's not relevant for these purposes. These purposes, the questions, what did Donald Trump try to do? It was clearly for himself, and as Nick pointed out, not for any of the reasons he told the American public he was talking to President Zelensky.
As always, we get great legal nuance from you. The presidential part is what will Congress do or not about Donald Trump's alleged conduct, and some of it proven, according to, they're dealing with his side of the story. His side of the story makes him look bad. The liability question goes to what we learned in the Mueller report, which is people like Mr. McGahn and Mr. Lewandowski sometimes talked to lawyers and didn't do things because Donald Trump's orders would have put them in jail, not unlike his lawyer, Michael Cohen, and other people who are waiting trial who are facing that exposure, Rudy Giuliani. Both of you stay. Eleanor Clift, looking at the Congress, I want to play for you briefly Mitt Romney's reaction today. Take a listen.
I did read the transcript. It remains troubling in the extreme. It's deeply troubling.
The reason we are here is partly because the Washington response has not been to treat all of this as, quote unquote, another Trump affront. Is this time different, and if so, how, in your view?
I would like to think it's different, and I think what Senator Romney said is appropriate, but he's said these things before and he doesn't follow up on them. But the fact that the Senate passed a resolution saying that the report, whistleblower's report, had to be turned over to the Congress, and Mitch McConnell allowed that to the floor, and all the Republicans voted for it, it gives me some hope. And then George Conway tweeted this afternoon that he's convinced that Republicans will, if the impeachment comes to the Senate, they will vote to convict. Now, he's married to Kellyanne Conway, and I don't pretend to understand how they can live under the same roof.
Well, let me ask you a follow-up. You know, I don't know how to predict anything, and I try to avoid predictions in our reporting. But if you look at just the past few days, a lot has suddenly changed. Look at this number that I think is still sinking in around the country. 79 new impeachment backers in Congress. Whatever they thought before wasn't enough. Something this week changed. That number you see on your screen, 216, that is a White House heartburn number because 218 is a majority of the House backing impeachment.
Right. Are there any Republicans in that number?
One former Republican, but it's all you need.
Former Republican.
All you need is. All you need is, and in that number, that's a count of Dems, so it'll be 217. Go ahead, Eleanor.
No, I hear you. And there are echoes of Watergate here, and the Republicans held on Watergate until finally the Saturday Night Massacre and the tapes. So they held until suddenly they didn't. And
do you think we're looking at tape? Is this like a tape, what I'm holding?
I think this is a definitive moment in the Trump obstruction of justice scenario. I mean, there are so many instances you could cite where he has abused his power. But I think Nancy Pelosi went ahead with this one because it's different. It's clear. It's a clear abuse. It's understandable. And I think it may shift public opinion, and it may shift opinion on Capitol Hill. The Republicans in the Senate, they're on committees. They understand how you deal with foreign leaders. They're not complete toadies, at least I don't think so. And this has got to give them pause. And so I think, we might be seeing the beginning of some slippage.
Eleanor Clift, always appreciate your insights from Washington. Maya and Nick, thank you. We may come back to you. Depends what happens, as this is a breaking story. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.